Sometimes it takes just a few frames to develop a passion for a particular filmmaker. For us, everything started with footage shot in Vietnam in 1954, amidst these very hills. Archive footage. Flanked by a handful of Vietnamese soldiers, 3,500 troops of the French Expeditionary Force wander morosely towards the POW camps on the Chinese border. This footage is now part of our collective memory. It inevitably crops up in every documentary made about the war in Indochina. Over the years, these bedraggled soldiers have come to embody the scale of the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. Their distress is so apparent that no one ever even thinks to question the origin of the film sent as news footage to press agencies around the world by the communist propaganda machine. Look. A Vietnamese soldier is at the head of the column, leading the way. He has disappeared from the final cut. Yes, the whole sequence was in fact shot in color. Other takes of this scene exist. It was shot several weeks after the battle was over. As these rushes show, several thousand POWs must have been brought back and forced to play their own roles in a reconstruction of events. On land as flat as this, how could the camera look down on the POWs and capture the whole of the column snaking from the center of frame to the horizon of history? A crane had to be built. The POWs had to be directed. To make them troop by as and when required, the column had to form a perfect S shape. Two cameras were needed, with the second cameraman filming side-on to the column. A group of soldiers had to be selected for close-ups. Time was needed to set up reflectors in front of their faces to reinforce the feverish sweat on their brows and glint in their eyes. The man who supervised the construction of the crane that day to capture this moment and turn it into an everlasting symbol was called Rom N K Rmen. He was anything but a novice. 9 years earlier, in Moscow, he was put in charge of filming the final parade of the defeated German army. We are not always aware of it, but Rom N K Rmen's images have shaped our memory and constructed our vision of the history of the 20th century. Cinematic pirate or genius screenwriter, he tirelessly collected photos tracing his passage through history. Rom N K Rmen bestrode the century. He wrote its legends. As a Soviet newsreel cameraman during the Spanish Civil War, he joined the Republican fighters on the front line and glorified their will to win. The gaze he cast on these everyday heroes, or these orphans leaving for Moscow, still haunt us today. As a special envoy to China in 1938, during the war with Japan, he denounced the barbarity of the Japanese army from within the heart of the conflict. Throughout his life, Karmen's camera constantly sided with the victims of war. Called up to the Red Army at the age of 35, a few days after the German invasion, he made his camera a weapon. Day after day, for 4 years, he recounted the amazing story of Soviet fighters from Moscow to Berlin, where he filmed the taking of the Reichstag. As head of the Soviet film delegation at the Nuremberg trial of Nazi dignitaries in 1946, Rom N K Rmen followed the proceedings for several months. In the early 50s, he became a roving ambassador for socialism and the official cinematographer of most of the revolutions that marked the second half of the 20th century. In Hanoi in 1954, he captured for eternity the victory of a whole people over its colonizers. He was there at the outset of the Cuban Revolution. In 1972, having long passed 60 years of age, he traveled to Chile to bear witness to the surge of enthusiasm in the country for the communist-backed government of popular unity. Few filmmakers can claim to have shared firsthand the adventures of so many of the century's Marxist leaders. La Pasionaria in Spain, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Fidel Castro, Salvador Allende. As a Soviet filmmaker, Karmen from the mid-1920s to the early 70s constantly exalted the nation's worker heroes, turning them into clichés in the process. As a state filmmaker, he always served the regime, its successive leaders, and their frequent changes of direction, without question. His life seems an epic adventure. It was also a tragedy. He left us some of the most striking footage of the history of the 20th century. So striking, in fact, that one forgets he shot it. But look, it is indeed the same man who filmed with the same conviction and in the same way the defenders of Leningrad under siege. And the East German frontier guards keeping watch over the Berlin Wall. It is out of this paradox, and his apparent equanimity in filming history in the same way, whichever face it presented him with, that was born our desire to take even further our encounter with Rom N K Rmen. All the footage in this film is his. According to his official biography, which he constantly rewrote, Rom N K Rmen liked to characterize himself as a child of the October Revolution. He was a pure product of it. Roman was born in Odessa in 1906 into a family of Jewish intellectuals. His father, Lazar Karmen, was a writer and a revolutionary journalist under the pseudonym Lazar Karmen. Having taken up arms with the Bolsheviks, he died in 1920 as a result of the torture he endured in the jails of the White Russian Army. Roman, his mother and younger brother were provided for and lodged in the Kremlin's communal apartments. As the son of a hero of the Soviet Union, Roman was forever marked by the image of his father, being carried on their shoulders by the workers of Odessa. He is destined to attend the Workers' University and become a member of the new elite, but Roman has other ideas. He dreams of following in the footsteps of his father, who bequeathed him his stills camera. Roman also takes his father's pseudonym, and as Rom N K Rmen becomes a journalist. He starts out by photographing crime scenes, burials, and the regime's leading figures. Even then, he systematically has his photo taken with his subjects, as here with Maxim Gorky. On the recommendation of Mayakovsky, Karmen secures a post at the futurist magazine, Ogonyak. This is where he learns that an image is always a question of viewpoint, that it must be composed before being recorded, and that one shapes it to leave one's stamp on an event. Young Rom N K Rmen participated in the huge effervescence of ideas and art forms in the USSR in the late 1920s. Lenin once said, "Of all the arts, the cinema is the most important to us." Karmen can't wait to switch from photography to cine journalism. To capture the moment, movement, men and space, the cine camera seems an inimitable tool. As a newsreel cameraman, he films everything with the same appetite. The implantation of heavy industry. Leaders fixing new targets on the march towards socialism. In sum, the exaltation of a policy. Even in these ceremonies of mourning and bereavement, which are a feature of the new order developing under Stalin's control. Karmen learns to keep in with those in power. On foot, by motorbike and plane, Karmen crisscrosses the vast territory that is the Soviet Union. When the first cars roll off the production lines at the Tsil factory, and the company organizes a huge rally, Moscow, Karakorum, Moscow, Karmen teams up with Edward Tisse, Eisenstein's cameraman, to take part. At the wheel, shovel in hand or behind the camera filming bivouacs in the desert, Karmen learns how to show a human adventure at first hand. He learns how to put himself forward and write history as it is made. Karmen is young, handsome, and photogenic. Who better than he to embody the enthusiasm that accompanies these expeditions? He never omits to have himself filmed in his favorite role, special envoy to the theatre of history. This is a constant feature of his career. In Spain, during World War II, in the Vietnamese jungles, in the Sierra Maestra with Fidel Castro. At the age of 25, Karmen is a star, whose exploits have made him a familiar face to the Soviet public. He nevertheless finds time to marry a young girl, Marianna Jaruzelski. He chooses his bride well. Her father was a close companion of Lenin. Karmen is now part of the country's elite, living in his in-laws' private apartments in the Kremlin. It is time for him to move on from cine journalism to directing. Karmen is commissioned to make a film commemorating the opening of the Kosogorsk blast furnace. He brings lighting. These are the early days of the talkies. Karmen experiments with live sound and films day and night. With the resulting symphony to work and the machines in which man masters steel, Karmen's film is a glowing success and enchants those in power. In the early 30s, Karmen is top of the class. He is submerged with offers of work. He gets everything he asks for. He has sailors climbing up Odessa's famous steps in a magnificent tracking shot. And he films mothers on the terraces of cafes in reference to the scene in Battleship Potemkin, in which a pram careens down the steps under machine gun fire. The first purges have started, but in his films, Karmen deliberately ignores the terror sweeping across the country. The USSR is marching peacefully towards socialism and material comfort. Meanwhile, civil war has broken out in Spain. Stalin hesitates before deciding to send arms to Spain, and with them, his best cameramen. Rom N K Rmen wrote personally to the first secretary to request a mission to Spain. Request granted. On August the 22nd, 1936, as a correspondent of Hisstory, Karmen arrives in Spain. He is not alone. He is accompanied by a cameraman friend, Makaseyev. As a kind of opening credit sequence to their chronicles, they film each other. Having authenticated their footage, the adventure can begin. For the first time, Rom N K Rmen knows he has a date with history. On Barcelona's Ramblas, Karmen makes acquaintance with another world. He tries his hand at sketching. He films terraces of cafes and everyday Spanish life. Karmen films whenever he can, seeking the right tone. His gaze becomes sure, always at the right distance from people and events, as in this sequence of boys playing at war. A roving reporter, he even allows himself the luxury of sending Moscow more offbeat moments to help them share his enthusiasm, as in this parody of an American gangster movie on a Barcelona beach. Karmen is 30, a young man still. He stays at the Florida Hotel with Robert Capa and Joyce Evans, and shares daily life on the front line with Ernest Hemingway. The reels he sends to Moscow are edited and shown under the name Spanish Chronicles. In the Soviet Union and around the world, his footage receives considerable acclaim. No one can forget the expressions of these young men and women of the international brigades, standing up to Franco's tanks armed with nothing more than shotguns. The civil war spreads to the towns and villages. The front line is all around. Karmen heads for it.
Враг отброшен. Республиканские части захватили 25 пленных.
By having these International Brigade volunteers pose handing out cigarettes to Italian POWs, Karmen demonstrates his confidence in his message. In Toledo, caught between the Phalangists and the rebels in the Alcazar, the Republicans mount a staunch defense from their barricades. Karmen penetrates into the heart of the fighting by sticking as close as possible to the combatants. He displays uncommon composure and physical courage. Filmed by his friend Makaseyev, he waits for the very last moment before taking cover from the machine guns. He carries a Bell and Howell camera with a 3-lens turret, allowing him to switch between framing and depth of shot and capture events using jumps in space and time. As we can see from his footage, if he allows fighters to run across shot, it is to better frame them and show the physical proximity of conflict and death. In this way, Karmen constantly places the audience at the heart of the people's resistance. He wages war while filming it, and gives the footage a distinctive signature. Watch him filming 9 years later, during the fall of Berlin. We easily recognize him behind each of these shots. The Republicans are losing ground by the day. Franco's troops are at the gates of Madrid. The Spanish government falls back to Valencia. The Soviet authorities ask Karmen to do likewise, but he feels strong enough to send them the following succinct telegram. I must film, and then film some more. For every frame shot at this time will be a page in history. The fighting takes over the center of Madrid. German and Italian bombers terrorize civilians and combatants alike. Karmen has no qualms about filming the horror of war. His footage of children's corpses brings home the implacable terror of fascism and is a first glimpse of the somber future that awaits the whole of Europe. In August 1937, Karmen is recalled to Moscow. He has a few grey hairs. He is given a hero's welcome at Kiev station, where he is joyously reunited with his son, for whom he has brought a Republican cap to show his attachment to Spain. Asked to say a few words, Karmen calls his friend Makaseyev to the microphone. Has he learned the value of discretion?
Показывая всем, на что способен передовой человек нашего мира, советская делегация была там и выполнила все задачи, которые дало нам партия и правительство.
Before he left Spain, Karmen witnessed the gradual elimination of anarchists and POUM members from the Republican Army. His final reportage was dedicated to the Spanish Communist Party's assertion of its control over Republican forces. Stalin has launched a new wave of terror. When President Kalinin decorates him with the Order of Lenin for his heroic actions in Spain, Karmen cannot not know that Wyszynski, who attends the ceremony, is the fearsome chief prosecutor at the show trials taking place in Moscow, just a few hundred yards away. Especially as, that particular day, someone is missing. Karmen's friend Kolstov has been accused of deviationism and sent to a gulag. In 1940, he was executed by firing squad. Here they are together on the barricades in Toledo. Karmen began his journalistic career with Kolstov at a Gonyok magazine. It was Kolstov who taught him that a war reporter must put his body on the line. Karmen paid tribute to him towards the end of his life, but never mentioned the circumstances surrounding Kolstov's death. In 1938, Japan attacked China. Recently decorated cameraman Rom N K Rmen is the documentary studio's special envoy. The Japanese invasion directly threatens the security of the Soviet Union. Rom N K Rmen must show that China is fighting back. He knows now how to film events, as if he knew what was going to happen in advance. In the midst of Japanese bombing raids, he deliberately takes up position at the heart of the tumult and reproduces the stylistic devices he mastered in his first war film: panic, exodus, distress. He doesn't think twice about climbing up onto a truck to get close to the fleeing population. He introduces into the story the menacing formations of Japanese bombers and shows refugees cowering in the mountains. All his shots are scrupulously composed, sometimes posed even.
Не все самолеты вернулись на свою базу.
It is no longer a question of merely provoking a sense of solidarity with the victims.
За наши города, за наших братьев, за вдов и сирот.
This is political. He must show how yesterday's enemies, the nationalists and communists, stand side by side against their common enemy. Official policy favors popular fronts. Karmen implements Stalin's orders.
Генералиссимус Чан Кайши.
He shows a new side to his character. As the Soviet Union's unofficial ambassador to China, he must appear in shot alongside nationalist leaders. On the front line, with every passing day, he becomes more of a film director, providing his editor with shots that he set up to complement the footage filmed in the heat of the action. The war becomes a production, preparing Karmen's fellow citizens for battles ahead. Karmen can lay claim to another scoop. He crosses China to the region where the communists have formed the 8th Route Army. Just like in Spain, as he sets out on this new adventure, Karmen has himself filmed as an adventurer on the road to Sichuan. When he arrives, he shows in pure Soviet style the constitution of a popular army, its organization, and its wonderful revolutionary enthusiasm. Here, he is writing the first of his legends, that of a young communist leader directing the struggle from a labyrinth of caves in the mountains. Mao is as yet a complete unknown. Karmen portrays him as organizer, orator, and general. Then he films the Sichuan Commune, showcasing all the required elements of socialism, collective enthusiasm, an organization giving an insight into the China of tomorrow.
Мао Цзэдун однажды сказал студентам Академии искусств, что их работа должна быть проникнута стилем революционного романтизма и антияпонского реализма.
And society driven by the party base, with these portraits of children of the revolution.
А это самые юные граждане особого района. Их отцы и матери далеко, на фронтах. Ребята окружены лаской, заботливым уходом. Меньше 3 мисок риса за обедом они не съедают.
Karmen refines his portrait of Mao, filming his peaceful existence in his cave with his wife, movie star Chang Ching, at his side. But Karmen is determined to give direction to his first head of state. Thanks to him, the Soviets will see that the thoughts of the little father of the peoples guides the Chinese Revolution from thousands of miles away in Moscow. Once more, Karmen doesn't forget to pose for history with Mao and his wife. While German troops are marching into Czechoslovakia, Karmen returns to Moscow and his colleagues at the documentary studios. Stalin has just signed his pact with Hitler, condemning Karmen to bide his time filming Dynamo Moscow's matches from behind the goal. Only in June 1941, with the Nazi-Soviet pact shattered, is Karmen reborn. Called up days after the German invasion, Captain Karmen quietly observes the war from the fields. The German army has swept through Soviet defenses. Leningrad is being flattened. Karmen's footage must reassure people. He produces a series of heartening reports far from the front. Like any good officer, Karmen obeys orders. October 1941. The German army suddenly hesitates outside Moscow. For Stalin, it is a decisive moment. He now knows that Japan will not attack. He recalls his whole Eastern Army and places it under Zhukov's command. The Germans must not be allowed to take Moscow. Stalin turns it into a symbol of Soviet resistance by launching a mammoth counter-offensive at the gates of the city itself.
Наши части выбивали немцев из населенных пунктов.
Karmen and his camera crews are part of the effort, filming the battle close up, always ready to set up a shot to reinforce the overall argument. His film must bear witness to the Soviets' extraordinary resilience and convince US public opinion once and for all that it is vital to give economic assistance to their new ally. Cameraman and soldier, like 600 other comrades, Karmen begins to forge his reputation. He knows when to take his time, as much as is required to capture the horror he sees. He looks death coolly in the eye. A hardened soldier, he is no longer the same man. His images now speak for themselves. He has achieved the rare combination of simplicity and force. The sight of Soviet civilians hanged by the German army sways international public opinion. The impact is similar to that of Karmen's footage from Madrid 5 years earlier. Karmen is also ready to trade blows. He has no scruples about filming Soviet soldiers warming themselves with the wooden crosses from a German military cemetery. In April 1942, Karmen crosses the frozen waters of Lake Logoda to enter Leningrad. His mission is to re-energize the camera crews who have been trapped in the besieged city for nearly a year and glorify the stubborn resistance of its inhabitants. Using fiction, illusion, and October by Eisenstein.
Старый путиловец, пенсионер товарищ Бобин, вернулся в эти дни в свой цех.
Parallel editing. Karmen transcends the terrible suffering of the population and writes a full-blown symphony, just like his friend Shostakovich, who resists day after day with music as his weapon.
And the whole city went on starvation rations. A factory worker got 8 ounces of bread a day. Everyone else, child and adult alike, only 4. And to keep
The voice is that of Edward G. Robinson in a special episode of Why We Fight, the great patriotic American series shown across the world. Director Frank Capra used almost in their entirety extracts from Rom N K Rmen's film.
This was Leningrad in its darkest hour.
The Allies decide to accord Karmen the much sought-after accreditation of correspondent for Associated Press. Major Karmen is now a member of Marshal Zhukov's staff. As such, he has access to the most confidential and precious military information. Ubiquitous, Karmen becomes, to quote Churchill, whom he films here in Moscow, the right man in the right place. He pops up all over the USSR, at each and every important battleground, as if possessing the gift of omnipresence. In fact, he has the logistical backup of a 5-star general. In January 1943, he receives forewarning of the imminent victory in Stalingrad. He arrives in time to witness Van Paulus's surrender and instinctively knows how it must be filmed. These few shots showing the German Field Marshal shivering will go down in history. Then Karmen calmly sits down and points his lens right into the German's face to pinpoint the vanquished and make him the symbol of the German defeat. A few days previously, the Red Army did not have enough cameramen to film the strategic turning point that enabled them to catch the Germans in a pincer movement. The regrouping of Soviet troops from the Urals and the Caucasus, if it ever took place, was never recorded. Karmen will rectify this, after the event, with enormous skill. An expanse of virgin snow, the equivalent of 2 divisions on either side of the frame. Forward movement, to ensure the comradely embraces of these thousands of soldiers are caught right in the center of shot. Thus reenacted, the scene now depicts a unique moment in the war. "94,000 Germans were taken prisoner at Stalingrad. To record the scale of the rout, Karmen takes up position on a hillside to film the column of defeated troops. He can call on this experience later when filming the French POWs of Dien Bien Phu. In 1943, Karmen points his camera westwards. He is now working for victory. Hope has changed sides. The Soviets are now on the offensive and won't stop until they reach Berlin. Karmen uses wider angles and shots following the tank columns. He opens up the space to the troops. A devotee of movement, the filmmaker covers the whole front from Belarus to Ukraine, capturing the conflict in perfectly framed shots in which corpses in the foreground point to another enemy defeat. Always in the vanguard, Karmen discovers a new way of recounting war. By establishing frames within his frame, he organizes the space around a foreground vertical, used, in the manner of a painter creating a false perspective, to compel the audience to keep looking forward. Now he is writing the legend of the Red Army and the Soviet soldier. After Kiev, Warsaw and Minsk, Karmen enters Berlin on April the 21st, 1945 with the first Soviet troops. He trusts nobody else to uncover the ruins of the Chancellery, which Zhukov and his staff stride through like a gigantic backdrop to the end of the world. Amidst the devastation on the streets and avenues of the German capital, the enemy, out of shot, has left behind only terrified civilians. Karmen films their plight as if he still has fresh in his mind his own footage from Spain and China. Isn't there but one way to film exodus and annihilation? The Reichstag falls during the night of April 30th. In the early morning, Karmen sets off. He can't afford to miss the most symbolic shots of victory. It is his camera that immortalizes the Soviet troops planting the red flag at the summit of the building. Then he poses, smiling, for history, glad to have come through it all unscathed, and more sure than ever that he was the only man to tell the story of the great patriotic war. He has cemented his position as the foremost filmmaker of war. What is he really? An officer, filmmaker or propagandist? For 4 years, the power of his images has been at the service of those in power. Did he have the right to choose? How meaningful is talent under the orders of the General Staff? At the end of his life, Karmen said, "There can be no cinema verite, since a filmmaker only looks at what he wants to show." One thing is for sure, the war was his. From then on, meetings in his office were held under the street sign of Unter den Linden, Berlin's finest avenue, which Karmen carried off as a trophy. On May the 8th, 1945, when Field Marshal Keitel signed Germany's unconditional surrender, Karmen can still run fast enough to overtake all the other cameramen and take up position just behind Marshal Zhukov, facing the defeated Chief of General Staff of the German Army. On June 10th, 1946, the Nuremberg Tribunal convenes for the first time. Rom N K Rmen is the head of the Soviet film delegation. There remains this photo of Karmen, in uniform and alone, facing history in the deserted courtroom. He supervises the filming of all the court's proceedings, but he keeps for himself the close-ups of Nazi leaders. He spares them nothing, as if determined to execute them with his camera. He can allow himself this unflinching hardness ever since he filmed the liberation of Majdanek death camp. Convinced that these images are not enough, he films heart-rending testimonies to the Commission of Inquiry. His camera does not tremble when confronted with so many destroyed human lives, and yet, is it because he has reached the limit of what it is possible to show that he deliberately allows his shadow to mingle with the shadows? What now? Karmen's answer is simple. He continues working. Firmly taking the side of what he considers to be life itself, the USSR needs rebuilding from top to bottom. Karmen glorifies the great reconstruction adventure.
На этом участке работает лучшая комсомольская бригада Павленко.
The vastness of the Soviet Union is a suitable backdrop for this exceptional man. The world is supposed to look exactly like the image laid down by the regime. Karmen turns reality into a blockbuster. He recalls the stylistic devices of his early years, pushes them to their furthest limit and exhausts them. And never mind if these tracking shots are now essentially aimless.
Фильмы о будущем.
The USSR becomes the setting for a musical. Now a master of deception, this everlasting handshake gives a firm indication of Karmen's value to the powers that be. While Stalin oversees the execution of the Jewish medics alleged to have organized the so-called doctor's plot, Rom N K Rmen is filming oil rigs in the Caspian Sea. As director, he can take sole credit for the result. Nothing is refused him, and he grants himself every luxury: special effects, studio shoots, models.
К морским нефтяникам едут артисты Большого театра Союза СССР.
On the tiny deck of an oil rig, he summons a grand piano, composer Gadaev, and the dancers of the Bolshoi Ballet. Anything to stave off boredom. Karmen Karmen films the workers as 5 years earlier he filmed the inhabitants of Leningrad under siege. Filming peace in preparation for war. In 1954, Karmen joins the Viet Minh on their march towards victory. He sets up his camera on a hilltop and frames shots where the vanishing points marry the curves of an impenetrable jungle. He shows our people on the march, in control of the terrain, ready for the decisive battle. The 105mm guns, hauled up to the crests overlooking the basin of Dien Bien Phu, are in position. General Giap has the French forces surrounded. In reality, Karmen didn't shoot any of this footage during the battle. Everything was filmed afterwards, like in the movies. Like at Stalingrad, all he needed were 2 divisions of Vietnamese troops to reenact, not far from Hanoi, the important moments of the Great Battle. Karmen doesn't need actuality anymore. He can reconstruct the event, and the Baudois valiantly charge for his benefit, just as the soldiers of the Red Army did on footage shot 9 years earlier in Belarus. Karmen trusts his model. This American Sherman tank, captured from the French, crossing the basin of Dien Bien Phu, recalls those Red Army tanks. The welcome given to the Vietnamese victors is the same as that given to Soviet troops entering Minsk or Kiev. This parade ground spectacular completes the transformation of the Vietnamese victory into a Soviet triumph. Having portrayed the victory, Karmen turns to the defeated army. This sequence was designed to influence public opinion as the Chinese and Soviets sat down in Geneva to negotiate the independence of North Vietnam. Accompanied by a Yves Montand song, this footage became a central scene of the film Karmen had come to Vietnam to make.
Солдат шел на войну с надеждой на победу. Возвращается он, битый, грязным бельем в своем ранце.
Quand un soldat revient de guerre, il a dans sa musette un peu de linge sale. Partir pour mourir un peu à la guerre, c'est un drôle de petit jeu.
Here we see him crossing the border in the last days of the battle for Dien Bien Phu. Eisenstein reenacted the October Revolution. Now it's Karmen's turn. From the opening scenes of the film, he's in the realm of fiction. To write his Vietnamese legend, all he needs is a tiny patch of liberated territory. Karmen makes the village of Tai Yen his base and his studio. He recruits enthusiastic Vietnamese assistants for his 2 Soviet camera operators. Then he gets to work, filming the founding moments of the revolution, which have taken place without him. He persuades the party's Politburo to reenact for him the meeting which led to the Battle of Dien Bien Phu.
В суровые годы войны правительство республики, возглавляемое президентом Хо Ши Мином.
This government in the jungle, defying a powerful modern army with plentiful American equipment, astounds the world. Karmen shows its wide-ranging organization through its hospitals, arms factories, and training schools. And like in China, its citizen artists. He covers the compulsory aspects of the construction of socialism, literacy campaigns, trials of landowners, and redistribution of land. Ho Chi Minh is preparing for power. Karmen, who knows a thing or two about directing statesmen, films him simply. Ho Chi Minh goes along willingly with his edifying characterization as a simple man of the people. Out of their encounter came images that have been conserved religiously to the present day. Their purpose is to recount the amazing overthrow of the colonial power and the development of socialism in Vietnam. Karmen played his part, and the day the Viet Minh entered Hanoi, he didn't hesitate to pose in full regalia with his Vietnamese assistants. That day, having positioned his cameras all over the city, he was not just a filmmaker, he was the best ambassador of the USSR on a very official mission. As he leaves Vietnam, Karmen is aware that he is now capable, whatever the occasion, of catching up with history and giving it his stamp of approval.
После штурма Манкада флот 3,5 года. В декабрьской ночи к побережью Кубы подошла маленькая шхуна Гранма. С нее высадились 82 человека. Горстка революционеров вернулась из эмиграции, чтобы освободить родину или умереть. Их вел Фидель Кастро.
7 years later, he has another chance to prove it. The USSR waited for Fidel Castro's rebellion to succeed before supporting his Barbudos. Now Karmen is sent to write their legend. Cuba's new leaders had been unable to keep any record of their landing from the Granma. Karmen will make it a gift to them. Using a film technique known as day for night, he recreates the landing as if he were there himself.
Их обнаружили. Это был первый бой, неравный бой. Из 82 осталось 12. Так рождался новый день пылающего острова.
These images are now part of the Castro legend.
Весь мир смотрел на маленький остров в Карибском море.
A crisis is brewing in Cuba. It will spread to the world.
Что же произошло на Кубе?
Filming the streets of Havana, Karmen addresses a message to his fellow citizens. He offers them another face of socialism. Happy, liberated people, and revolutionary fervor with a hint of rum and Cuba Libre.
Артистический кабачок в Старой Гаване вместо теплых дружеских.
Like this footage of Nicolas Guillen and Pablo Neruda listening to a song recounting the adventures of the Barbudos. The Soviets get the message and see in this footage reminiscent of the general line, a fervor which reinforces the belief that socialism can emerge from its ashes after Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin at the 20th Congress. While the Cubans cheer Fidel without forgetting to thank Nikita, Karmen films Castro as the big brother of the revolution, a charismatic leader constantly flouting protocol.
Для кого же, как не для вас, штурмовалась крепость Манкада? Шла сквозь бури маленькая шхуна Гранма. Умирали люди в Сьерра-Маэстро.
He travels with Fidel to the Sierra Maestra and succeeds in passing off simple maneuvers as a critical stage in the guerrilla war. Tired, but overjoyed, he once more acts out revolution. When the USA threatens Cuba, Karmen is brutally reminded of why he is there. The journalist in him comes out and he films the Soviet Foreign Minister Mikoyan, who has come to assure Castro of the USSR's unfailing support. He also takes care to show the arrival of Soviet aid and tractors, just as he has done in the four corners of the globe throughout his career, always telling the same story. Soviet policy has changed. Peaceful coexistence is now the order of the day. Karmen puts his shoulder to the wheel. He is detailed to accompany Nikita Khrushchev to receptions with heads of state and leaders of the non-aligned movement. Karmen does as he is told, filming Castro and Nehru in various guises. The prankster Khrushchev can't last. He is sidelined by his Politburo colleagues.
До свидания. Дружба.
Karmen immediately adopts Brezhnev's line. But then does he really see any difference? It's still the same socialism whose history he is writing. Karmen doesn't stay long in his office in Moscow, despite his promise never to set foot in Berlin again. Here he poses for the camera, filming the Brandenburg Gate like a military objective.
Впервые слова «Пролетарии всех стран, соединяйтесь» были произнесены на немецком языке.
1968. Czechoslovakia is in turmoil. As Soviet tanks repress the Prague Spring, Karmen is charged with bringing back from the celebrations of the 150th anniversary of Karl Marx's birth, images showing how good life is in East Berlin.
Подвиг и великие жертвы.
A zealous servant of the regime, he shows the right Germany, its youth and its love of life. Nor does he forget the Vopos, keeping watch on the wall that protects the German Democratic Republic. He films them exactly as he filmed the defenders of Leningrad. He is ready now for festivals, juries, award ceremonies and gala evenings. It can only lead to a dead end. Once more, the twists and turns of Soviet politics provide an escape route.
30 лет назад мы с кинооператором Борисом Макасеевым, с кинокамерой «Аймо» на плече, перешли испанскую границу. Это было давно, очень давно. Вот как видите, мы с Борисом сняли друг друга в этот памятный для нас день перехода испанской границы.
The USSR has re-established diplomatic relations with Franco. Rom N K Rmen can return to Madrid, the scene of his first exploits, with a home movie camera.
На улицах Мадрида, Севильи, Барселоны, Толедо я вглядывался в лица моих сверстников и молчаливо спрашивал их: помните ли вы то, что помню я? Здесь, на площади Сибелис, по ступенькам вот этой самой станции метро, люди, спасаясь от бомб, бежали под землю.
There is something tragic in the juxtaposition of the footage he shot 30 years before and the images he now films.
Потому что будущее Испании все равно принадлежит вам. Вам, а не этому состарившемуся с тех пор на 30 лет человеку, когда-то пожимавшему эти руки, сделавшие его диктатором Испании и ухитрившемуся остаться безнаказанным, но все равно все больше и больше чувствующему, как земля уходит у него из-под ног.
While the USSR delivers coal to Franco, Karmen pursues his crusade against fascism.
Поднимаете свой голос вы, молодые испанцы. Вы, чьим
For the
юным
first time in his
сердцам
life,
ненавистен
he is
режим
obliged to
тирании.
direct himself, to express himself in the first person. He will never stop. In the 1970s, Latin America is a seething cauldron. The USSR lends its weight to popular uprisings, Anticipating the imminent conversion of the whole South American continent, Karmen flies out to Chile. With the same fervor as in Spain, Karmen spent several months with Salvador Allende.
И молодые чилийцы идут на борьбу с лозунгом отцов. Но пасаран, фашисты не пройдут.
He is once more swimming with the tide of history and shares his adventure with us.
Мы направлялись на север континента. Разумеется, не во всех странах Латинской Америки мы побывали, но там, где мы снимали, хотелось увидеть и запечатлеть черты сегодняшнего дня континента. Его борьбу, его раны, его надежды.
Karmen has found his subject once more. He strikes the right tone. His emotion is sincere. Just as when he filmed the open cities of Pomerania. Alas, the government of popular unity is outgunned. The tide has ebbed. The stadiums have fallen silent. Socialism will advance no more. All that remains is to honor its veterans. For Karmen's 70th birthday, a ceremony is organized for the old master of the documentary studios. He partakes with a weary smile. His present is his own Bell and Howell camera, mounted on a copper plate. Rom N K Rmen is now one of the last comrades-in-arms of the masters of the Kremlin. The regime doesn't forget. At the height of the arms race with the Americans, Brezhnev needs a propaganda film. Karmen is put in charge of a colossal 10-episode project for television, retracing the key moments of the Second World War in the USSR. The aim is to convince the American people of the terrible sacrifices the Soviet Union made to save the world from fascism.
В Соединенных Штатах Америки кинопрограмму комментировал артист Берт Ланкастер.
Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. I'm standing in Red Square, the heart of Russia.
Я стою на Красной площади в самом центре России.
Karmen is 72. This is his curtain call. The US movie star Burt Lancaster has agreed to present this epic adventure. Karmen happily poses as an old buddy of the Hollywood actor for the making of the film, as if he knew that this would be his last testament and last image in the history of cinema.
С нами эти живые мгновения творчества.
Karmen did not see the project through. He was struck down by a heart attack after an evening spent in the bar of the Moss Film Studios. March is a cold month in Moscow. There was a last sprinkling of snow on the ground as he was carried to Novodevichy Cemetery, where the apparatchiks, generals, physicians and filmmakers rest in Soviet peace. The day he died, the authorities insisted on showing off all his medals. Storming the skies to build a world, he was able to convince himself throughout his working life that reality was a badly told story, and that the only way to stay ahead of the game was to shape it, to make it more real, and therefore more true to life. He was ruthless with history, but he made it his legacy. To keep from falling silent, he made his art stammer, verge on repetitiveness. When the future Karmen longed to see finally slipped between his fingers, he had no choice but to romanticize his own life. He liked elegant clothes, but he constantly swapped different guises. There are not one, or two, or three Karmens, but a whole multitude. The photos he collected throughout his life will never be able to illustrate the true complexity of the man. As if he wanted to leave to posterity another story than the one he was commissioned to write. His own.